Very welcome, Daryna and Hans. This is already our fifth live stream since the war started. So, my name is Ruud Bij. I'm from the Netherlands, living in Alkmaar, a bit of the north of Amsterdam. I have two interesting guests. First is Daryna Zarzhytska. Yeah. And you are a president of the Educational Center for Human Rights in Lviv. And you already were in the Netherlands a couple of years ago. And Hans Sakkers worked for City of Utrecht, is a strategic program manager in international relations, if I remember well, and very much involved in human rights cities. So how we're going to do this hour? First, I'm asking Daryna and Hans to introduce themselves, and after that, Daryna, but I very much like if you would tell something about how is life in Lviv this week, so to say, and then we can go on to our subject of this evening, and in the end, I will invite our other guests to join us in a joint conversation about this subject. So this is a bit what it is. So maybe Daryna, you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ruud. Yes, I was in the Netherlands, I think 3 years ago. It was a wonderful time, and I have very warm memories from that time, and thank you for the invitation. As you said, my name is Daryna Zarzhytska. I'm an executive director of the Educational Center for Human Rights in Lviv. It's NGO, and when we were created, we act as providers of public educational events about human rights, equality, and inclusion. But a little bit more than a year ago, we changed the format of our activities. It was related both to pandemic of COVID-19, and it was also related to our desire to be more efficient in communication with our audience, and actually to have more audiences than we had before. So I think 1 year ago, we started to act as content studio. We create text content, video content, storytelling projects in the genre of explanatory journalism. And we also decided to work with more topics than we worked before. We realized, and actually COVID-19 showed it, that sometimes it is too early to talk about human rights, about minorities in Ukraine. Before, you need to talk about critical thinking, about information literacy, and about civic literacy. And I'm very proud of my team because in the beginning of this year, we had strategic planning session, and actually all the topics that were discussed during this strategic planning session, now we see they are relevant even under condition of war. Because we talked about critical thinking, about common sense, we talked about the identity of Ukrainians, we talked about civic literacy, and all these topics are relevant even now. And our organization continues to work. Maybe it was personally a little bit difficult because our daily routine, our working routine on February 24 was, it is evident that it was damaged. But I think in 1 week after Russia attacked Ukraine, we continued to work. We continued to create content because we have some responsibility. In relation to our audience, and we know that our audience needs our content, we decided to create more texts to explain news, to explain these new conditions, to explain some norms, for example, of international law, and to help people to understand this new world. And I think that we will continue to do it, and after our victory. And we also added some new directions of our work. We started actually, we currently work on explanation videos about Russian crimes against Ukraine before 2014. We want our audience and all Ukrainians have strong arguments and very concrete facts about cases of how Russia colonized Ukraine for many years. We want Ukrainians can discuss with their friends abroad all these trigger moments of Ukraine-Russia relations. We want people to be aware how long Russia provided cultural appropriation. And we also plan to create this video adopted for foreigners. They will be translated to English. So I think it is also very useful, and it is, it's some base for unity of Ukrainians in condition of war and after the war, because I think that lots of conflicts within Ukrainian society were caused by different understanding of context. And I think that our content can help to unite society and to provide the mutual understanding of history and of the current context. Concerning Lviv, Lviv now is a relatively safe city, because today you cannot feel yourself safe anywhere in Ukraine. And here in Lviv, of course, we have luxury to think about some information campaigns. We have luxury to live more or less normal life, but actually we also have our condition of war. Our city also has been changed, and I think it will be changed for long years. And I hope also that today we'll have this opportunity to talk and to discuss what is possible plots of the future for Ukraine, for Europe, for European cities, for Ukrainian cities, because I think that today in Ukraine we have a situation when each city has its own condition. And in Lviv, its condition of being hub for internally displaced people, being a transit point for people who go further abroad, be center for humanitarian aid, and it is also logistics. It is challenge for the city in means of logistics, because you know that Lviv is not very big city, and it is challenge. But I think that our city administrations can manage it.
Okay, thank you. That's quite a story already. So before we go on with that, I want to ask Hans to give a short introduction of yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Ruud. Yeah, well, from the point of view of my work, it's on one hand, we try to support local developments in Utrecht by opportunities of international framework like human rights. So how can human rights inspire local practices, and the other way around? Another part of my work for the municipality is to exchange with from our local experience to the international movement of human rights cities, and to improve international policies, but also to learn from other places. And well, that was one of the most interesting experiences for me, was the moment that we were in Lviv and organized by the organization of the Daryna, and to learn from each other. And what was so special for me is that an non-municipal organization is challenging the municipality and involving them in this thinking of what can human rights bring to you, and also to put the whole human rights on the agenda of a city, and organizing things in the Catholic university, and make things starting to speak about it. And the way you in inviting civic society to, and the way you're telling this story, and what you say, this storytelling is there we, I think, still learning from what you are doing. Well, perhaps a few sentences more for where we're coming from. And in our international work, we also work a lot with other cities worldwide. Our deputy mayor, Linda Fortman, is also one of the co-presidents of the Committee for Social Inclusion, Human Rights of the UCLG, the Worldwide Association of Local Government and Communities. And in that role, we try to push more on the agenda of the international institutions, as the OHHR, the UCLG, and the to create a much bigger movement of human rights cities. And the last 2 years, some things really make some steps forward, I think. In Europe, the Fundamental Rights Agency worked very hard on the first European framework for how to become a human rights city. We launched it in October last year in Vienna. I think that's a very important step for European cities, that we now finally have a real reference point of what are the most essential things that we have to keep in mind and where we have to work on. And worldwide, the UCLG have an agreement with the OHHR and signed also a way of, with Michelle Bachelet and also the High Commissioner, that we will work together on creating a much more bigger movement worldwide. With we say in 10 years' time, we want to go from 100 human rights cities, or cities that call themselves human rights cities, explicitly to 1,000. And can we have 100 cities more every year? So that is. And but also this campaign will be launched in this coming autumn in South Korea. So things are developing, and
So maybe from start with a question like, basically there's two questions. So first of all, why cities of human rights? So what's the importance of cities when it comes to human rights? I know you once told me, Hans, you were a bit skeptical about the title human rights cities, because you say, well, we have to become something like a human rights city. I think you explained something like that. And my second question is basically related to that, is the starting of this war on February 24. Does that change the agenda of human rights cities? Does it mean that you have to think differently about human rights cities than you did before February 24? So basically the two questions: why cities, and what changed after February 24? Maybe I will start with Hans, because Daryna already explained something about this, but the idea of cities and human rights. So why are cities so important for human rights?
Yeah, or perhaps it's good to tell a little bit from what's happening on the ground in cities on this moment. That is, I think, very much inspired by and not always called explicitly human rights, but I think in not only in Utrecht, but in most European cities, you see in general reaction on the war and the way Ukrainian cities are attacked. And the first is, I think that cities are massively offering security by welcoming refugees. And that is not something that happened that way before. By offering housing, education, psychological help, and organizing the registration, access to facilities and care, the right to work. And so this is for most parts of Europe and totally new situation that this suddenly is possible. That was not possible, and that I think that has something to do with an awareness that this human rights violation, and we cannot accept. So, and the opposite is support and help. And the second layer, what cities are doing, I think, is not only offering a safe space, but also concrete support actions, sending goods of all sorts, city to city. Sometimes you see that also cities in, for example, Hanover is helping Poznan and helping them to welcome refugees. But sometimes you see cooperation of Warsaw, Zagreb together, sending basic necessities, long-lasting food, sleeping bags, first aid kits, drinking water, and so on. And perhaps the layer that is a third element that is not mentioned that much, I think, is that cities all over Europe are now suddenly places of expressing human rights. So the protests, peace rallies, symbolic support, cities, collectives, declarations, changing the names of streets, especially those where Russian embassies are in. And this is mainly, I think, about that cities want to be places of hope, of futurity, and where this, suddenly this European social imaginary getting a voice, inspired by the resistance of Ukrainian cities. So this cultural dimension is also based in this connectedness of cities, and and I think that for us in Europe, that the Ukrainian cities are becoming a very sad way of crystallization of becoming aware what are the values that we are standing for. In Utrecht, I can say, but that is not very exciting in the sense that that is happening I think in many cities, that we have a central place for welcoming refugees with an emergency shelter with camp beds for hundreds of people, so that no one has to sleep on the street. People getting registration. There is matchmaking between host families for people that don't have family or relatives or friends themselves. Hotels are opening up, and as a municipality, we now building and buying all kind of buildings and big buildings are redesigned to have much more places available in the coming weeks. But when you compare it to the numbers in Polish cities, it's of course still very low numbers. And the challenges are very practical on one side, and on the other side, you see also in the of course, how do we finance these facilities? What to do with trauma? How long will it? What happens with the families? All this kind of insecure aspects, but also the ambivalent discussion you see now also in the international stage, that we have many refugees, of course, waiting already for a very long time in our cities, without all the facilities and the right to work, and without the permission. And now this moment, I think it goes that direction, that the whole human rights discussion is now, and what we now learning from this crisis, that we start to tell a new story in Europe, that we also have to take care in a much better way with other refugees coming to Europe. And so that it's the way we starting to learn how to handle this crisis, that it will be a very strong learning effect also for people that are also victim in some cases in Syria for the same Russian army. So that's for this moment.
You're so right when you mentioned this solidarity of different cities in Europe, in the world, with the renaming of streets, with help for Ukrainian refugees. And you know, this solidarity is also very strong feature of today Ukraine, and actually sometimes even Ukrainians are impressed with this unity and this readiness to help each other. And I think that for both for Ukrainian cities and for European ones, it is there is a risk for the future that we will be burned out of this volunteering, of this managing of refugee crisis. And I think that even now we can start to think about how can we manage all these possible risks in the future, because they can be related both to urban infrastructure and our mental conditions.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Daryna? You say, well, perhaps it's a little bit too early to speak in terms of human rights. That was you mentioned before, but I didn't remember exactly the context that you were mentioning. But I was thinking, don't we see all these huge human rights violations so clearly because of the fact that we have a kind of internalized international standard of human rights, and that exactly this standard is the reason that we are able to see this gap between the reality and the international normative and legal standards so clearly, and that is also that gives us the means to talk about war crimes, and that the work, for example, what Bellingcat is doing with all this investigative work, that they having this accepted frame of reference. So it is perhaps not helping or to prevent on this moment, but it's having a kind of moral perspective that things make things very clear. What do you think?
Well, I think you're right, but you know, now it is really difficult to talk in some concrete way about violations or something like that. But at the same time, we also need to think about future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about future a little bit, what we could do, and perhaps I can do a proposal and to see what you think. Is this a good idea? And what the idea I have is, there is in Europe a title on it's called European Capital of Culture, and every year there are 2 cities and 2 member states that could apply for this. It's a very heavy procedure, 5 years before, and there's a lot of competition. And but there is only every 3 years the possibility of a non-EU member state to apply, and the next time that's possible is in 2028. And I was thinking, and the coming year we have to that cycle is now having to apply, and that means that that it could be possible to have a Ukrainian city or a couple, perhaps, or just say, well, we have Odessa, Lviv, and Kyiv, or only Lviv, and we apply with some cultural people, well, having relation in the cultural world, on music, on theater, on exhibitions, on well, it can be very broad, to bring them together in Europe and to organize a collective bid. And I think that I asked the head of the international affairs and the culture affairs people in Lviv, and they of course they're busy with other things, so they don't have time and no means, and of course on this moment to organize this kind of bidding. But if I understand, I asked them, would you endorse this kind of European initiative in some other European cities if we starting to with people from the cultural sector from Lviv to make a plan for 2028? And well, I got an answer, great. But would it be helpful to work on this this far future of 6 years from now? Could it be, and what could be the European story? Because in this programs, it's mostly seen as a title of Europe for your city, so it's used by many cities in kind of marketing. But in this case, I think Lviv could have to offer Europe so much, and could learn from what is happening now to tell a totally new story to Europe that could be included in what is European thinking, and well, is this an idea that is too far away, or could it be helpful to create hope? Or
I think that it could be helpful, but you're absolutely right that now our local cultural institutions are busy with other deals, and many of them now are shelters for IDPs.
mm-hmm.
So I think that now they don't have an opportunity just think in such a global way, but for the future, it is very important. Actually, cultural sphere is very important because, you know, our Ukrainian culture, our artists were in the shadow of the Russian ones, and I have a colleague. She is historian of art, and she said that now we have not only war in the terms of some military issues. Now we have war, not only information war, cyber war, but we also have cultural war. And I think that it is very important to present to the world Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian artists. And of course, we have in Ukraine, we have several institutions which can provide this application. And I think that if we talk about several cities, it's not issue of the local level, because we have Ukrainian Institute, it's national agency, and I think it's more about work of this institution than local ones. But I know I'm similar with this idea of European cultural capital. I've been to Kaunas in autumn 2021, and Kaunas is one of the European cultural capitals in 2022. So it is a great idea, and it could be helpful for Lviv, but I think it's a really national level issue. especially when we talk about combination of Lviv, Kyiv, and Odessa.
We also have Marta from Gdansk and Kristiina from Turku, huh? And Sebastian from Köln and Sneh from London.
So hello everyone, and I'm sending my best regards to Daryna, to Lviv, and of course to Utrecht, to Hans, and so what I wanted to comment is that maybe two things. That first is I think we are going through a very traumatic process now. And I don't want to go into Daryna's shoes now, but also, speaking for Ukraine nation, but also for ourselves. I mean, Gdańsk is a city in north of Poland, and obviously we are scared of every day, and about the future of what is going on and what is going on in Ukraine, what is going on in Poland, and what is the future of this situation. And in terms of human rights, it's even hard to make any conclusions yet. You try to talk about culture, capital, and so on, and I appreciate that. But this is something, for myself, we and given this situation, and we sit with people at night, and we try to convince mayors of Europe to stop trade with Russia, and we wonder, and films are being made and so on. This is where we are now, and we are wondering what is happening with the Europe's response and global response to what is happening. So this is where we live, and this is we look at people, living at the gym rooms, in hundreds, and we wonder about their future and so on. So I think it's important to say that. And the second thing I wanted to say is that what I understand, what I see from how Polish state responds to the refugee situation that is happening is that, and I wonder about the global approach to refugee situations. I don't want to call them crises, because refugee situation and war situation is a natural situation too. Yes, when we called 2015 situation a crisis, we were speaking in fact about a political crisis, not a refugee crisis. Yes, and I don't want to attach the word crisis to a refugee. So I think we as a state are in crisis, and lack of systemic approach, the state is almost invisible in all that. They created an act which says that you become a refugee when you kind of you end up in a city, and you go to a city hall and you apply for an ID number, and this is when you are recognized, in the panorama. It doesn't start anywhere earlier. So this is people are left to themselves, and absolutely the paradigm that we are speaking of here is of help. It's not a rights paradigm. Yes, that we speak of when we speak of human rights approach. So I don't think there is any kind of human rights approach to the refugee situation we are speaking of now. There is a help approach, and it's a help that is delivered by civil society. Yes, by the society, and the state is almost non-existent in all that, And so I would say that we are facing a catastrophe in terms of rights, and the UNHCR, what do they see and what is happening in between? It's lots of bad situations and lots of exploitation, and I'm really worried about the future and what will happen. So I think that we will need to reconsider, the bubble, try to think about of a human rights city, of a Utrecht bubble, or another bubble somewhere else. But when speaking of, do we care for rights now, and are European cities concerned about rights really. I am not sure about that. So this is what I feel now, and I'm sorry for this maybe emotional speech, but we are, it's beyond imaginative what is going on, I would say.
I listened to what you had to say, what you just said, Marta, about this catastrophe, help and rights. So to say that we are basically in a different genre. We are not in the genre of rights, but in the genre of help. I wonder if Daryna or Hans would comment on that. So
I think that all of us need to be aware of that fact that after February 24, I think the whole concept of human rights is changed. And as Marta said about this catastrophe, as I know, for the city, it is very usual to have, for example, several vulnerable groups. And now all Ukrainian cities and I think many of European cities deal with situation when almost the whole society is vulnerable. And for example, the number of these concrete vulnerable groups are bigger than it was before, and it will be bigger in the future. And cities also need to be aware of this possibility. And I think it is needed to deliberate this plot now and to think how can we handle it. And for example, for Lviv, it is obvious that we will have so many people even after victory, because there are many houses which need to be rebuilt. And today, Mayor of Lviv, Andrisa said that city administration will think about temporary housing for internally displaced people. And I think it's these houses will not be for months or for a year. I think we will need to, we will live in these conditions, in these new conditions, where some of the territories are for temporary houses. Sorry, I need to hear, is it air alarm on? No. Okay, so we already have this new reality, and actually not only the concept of human rights is changed. I think that now we see that there is a crisis in the whole system of international relations and the crisis in the whole system of international law, because the modern system of international law was created after the Second World War. And now we see that in condition of this military attack, the international law is international law can do nothing to stop this situation and to prevent even bitter consequences of the war. So I think that we have lots of questions to think how actually human rights will be transformed after this war, and we will need new system. Our president Volodymyr Zelensky talks every day about new security guarantees for Ukraine, but I think that the whole world, and especially Europe, will need new security system after Russia attacked Ukraine, because now we see that all that was created before cannot help now.
Hans, would you maybe add something to that? Like, put your mic on.
Yes, thank you. But when Sebastian wants to jump in, then but I was thinking that there was this today. There was in the Netherlands an interesting example of there was a lawyer on television, prime time. He said, "Well, there's a huge human rights violation in the Netherlands because there is no bunker at all anymore. So there is no shelter if the Netherlands would be attacked, and there is no way for people to hide." Because we had a law until 1986, and it was a law of protection where people could find shelter. There wasn't all things were checked all the time and trained, and it's gone. And he said, well, when a Dutch city would be attacked, then there is a human rights violation by the Dutch state because they are not protecting their citizens. And this argument was, he said, well, this is just human rights issue. And this kind of thinking is not very usual, used in the Netherlands, that you use that human rights is the principle behind something that you have to do. And suddenly the combination of what we're seeing now, what is happening, and the fear, of course, and but the argumentation that we still have a worldwide international moral standard in this human rights and the European Treaty. And that was, I think, an interesting moment that it's that people referring to something that is mostly implicit, certainly in the Netherlands, and now you see more and more that that it's used as an explicit moral standard, and that is. And I also see it the last year. It's in a bigger movement, I think, that in the worldwide organization of municipalities and cities, certain words during the Corona crisis are used much more. Suddenly, all kind of people speaking about human rights and localizing human rights. There is much more talking about. Of course, you can say, well, it's just a word, but it's also symbolizing a way of thinking and what people want to refer to, and what is the imaginary that they want to, and especially is that the human rights is an international concept, and it's not just a local subjective thing. It's something that is in treaties and conventions and charters, and besides it's a legal frame, it's also a cultural imagination. And I think that we can think, well, it doesn't work in the way that it's preventing, but you still, I think that we will see, especially in migration policies of Europe, that things will change because and reasoned by that we have to take in another way care about human rights in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. One of the things, and I will put all the cameras on that we can talk with each other, so to say, but several things what comes to my mind when I listen to you. So the first thing is, I think that we basically, I very much agree with this help versus human rights in a certain sense, but I don't like it, to say. And so in that sense, so I'm very much opposed to the word refugee today. And so one of my best friends from Lviv will come this Saturday to my home to seek a shelter for herself and her daughter. And she will stay here. And she also initially felt this idea, I'm a refugee and I'm leaving something behind where I should be, but I can't stand it anymore. And I said, well, don't consider yourself as a refugee, but as an exile. You're basically temporarily banned for your country, so to say, because for your nation, better to say. And that's I think a very, well, interesting is maybe the wrong word, but a helpful way to change this kind of narrative, what's happening now. If to be a bit like maybe a bit outraged, so to say, but basically we see, I see Alkmaar, where I live, of course, so and people from Lviv coming to Alkmaar makes Alkmaar an extended city of Lviv, so to say. So Lviv is coming a part of Alkmaar, and that's changed the relationship between cities. And I think cities are in that sense very important in appreciating that what's happening there. So this is one of the things I'm a bit thinking about, to change this narrative. For me, the narrative, the humanitarian narrative, no, not the humanitarian, the human rights narrative today in optima forma is basically about beating Putin. So we owe all of you, Daryna, in Ukraine, as Europeans, that we support you to beat Putin, because that is the cause of the immense violation of human rights in Ukraine. So if human rights mean something, that it should mean that. So not only humanitarian, it's important, of course, but we should do that. So, and then there is this, what's not, maybe not something like an answer to all the questions and also the challenges. I think you all come up with, and Daryna come up with, rethink human rights. I think human history from the genesis of human rights at the end of the 18th century is always related to catastrophes. So when human rights came to being in the end of the 18th century, it was like in the French Revolution, but it was also in European wars. And Napoleon boasted about this. I used 30,000 soldiers a month in his Russian tour to Russia, so to say. And human rights after World War II are basically an answer to the Holocaust, to be so in that sense. And that we have to think. And then we are now again in such a terrible situation that is a kind of a provocation for us to think, and I understand what Marta is meaning, that simply saying like that, to think about what can human rights mean in this context, so to say. And that is not what are human rights now, but human rights are always human rights to come. They are not yet there, they are human rights to come. And I think this is an interesting thing for me in any way, and thinking about citizens and changing our narrative from refugees to exiles. I don't know if that's the good word, so to say, but it puts us on another track, so to say. So it's a strange thing that now in Alkmaar and in a lot of cities in Europe, and not only in Europe, you see Ukrainian flags. That's something to think about. And maybe you have, Sebastian or Kristiina, or something that you want to join or to add to our discussion.
Yeah, if no one else wants to talk, I would just like to add a little detail, which is perhaps not fully in the focus of this discussion, but concerns, I would say, some kind of collateral, not damage, but kind of collateral issue that comes into the picture in this particular situation, and concerns city-to-city partnerships. So I am based here in Cologne, and Cologne is in Germany the city with the largest number of international city-to-city partnerships. And among these partnerships, there is one with Volgograd in Russia. There are, by the way, there's a large number of other cities in Germany that have partnerships with Russian cities. And their reactions to the current situation is very different and diverse. So we have cities that have suspended these partnerships immediately after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have others that try to maintain these partnerships. I'm not sure what that in practice means, whether there are any contacts ongoing. But anyway, in the case of Cologne, the city or the mayor made the decision 2 weeks ago to suspend this partnership, which I think is the right thing to do. The interesting thing is that the association Cologne Volgograd, which is an association of Cologne citizens that is part of this partnership already for decades. We have the same with other city-to-city partnerships in Cologne. There's always an association that is kind of organizing and coordinating the civic part of it, the unofficial non-political part of it. They are furious about this decision, and there are lots of letters from readers in the local press saying that this is the wrong decision, especially in such crisis situation. It is important that civil society contacts are maintained, citizen-to-citizen contacts are maintained. The critical or the crucial issue here is that this association is a kind of hub of traditional left activists, communist activists that at the beginning of the Russian invasion used the Putin's narrative to kind of legitimize the aggression on Facebook, and they took it off Facebook I think 48 hours later when they were confronted with criticism. So what I'm thinking about is, and this goes of course beyond this particular case, as we have and other cities have, for example, also partnerships with cities in China. Can we continue legitimizing and upholding city-to-city partnerships on the grounds of the importance of citizen-to-citizen contacts with cities in countries where there is no free civil society? Can we maintain such partnerships when on our side individuals and groups are coordinating the civic part of these partnerships that are kind of collaborating with representatives of the authoritarian regime on the other side? I think this is a question that we, at least in Cologne, I think also in other countries, we never honestly discussed. We perhaps haven't had the reason to do this. I think it is high time that we start thinking about these issues. I would say, of course, no one was prepared for this. No one will be prepared if something similar would happen in a couple of weeks or months with China invading Taiwan. Cologne has a partnership with Beijing, by the way, where there is of course no kind of free civil society contacts or citizen-to-citizen contacts in this partnership. This is mainly based on economic interests. So this is of course not in the focus of what we need to discuss in general in the context of the current situation. But when it comes to what can be done at the local level in terms of human rights work, as far as international relations of cities are concerned, I think this is also something to think about. I mean, how to deal with partnerships with cities in authoritarian countries, especially in such extreme situations as we have now.
Interesting point. I wonder if Daryna had something to say about that.
Yes, dear colleagues, I need to go because it's almost curfew in Lviv, and I'll need to turn off the light. But I wanted to add that, Ruth, you said that human rights means to kill Putin, but I would say okay. Well, I would say that it's also very dangerous statement, because I think that thinking about human rights today, we need to think about the moment when Russia as a state will take responsibility for all its crimes, not only in Ukraine, but in Georgia, in Moldova, and in other countries, and in Syria, you mentioned it also. And concerning partnerships with Russian cities, I think that it is not right that this war is only the Putin's fault, because you may see the data of independent sociologists that 71% of Russians support this war. And I think in the future, it will be needed to provide some politics of, like it was in Germany, denazification. Because actually, when you look at Russian history, there were lots of war crimes, and I think no one said to Russians that you are responsible for this. And now we have consequences of all these cases of history that people in Russia are not aware of that fact that they are responsible for the authority they elected. And, you know, Russian propaganda is based on fake news and other bad things. So I think it's a high time to stop relationships with Russian cities, with Russian NGOs. And Ruth, as you organize this Zoom, I also want to address you not to invite Russian students to Ukrainian to programs which made to support Ukrainians, because I think yesterday I saw the announcement of University of Amsterdam that Ukraine, I don't remember the exact title, but I think the fund to support Ukraine was created, and not only Ukrainian students, but also students from Russia and Belarus are invited equally with Ukrainians. And it's not right. It's shameful, and it hurts that in conditions of university programs, Ukrainians are equal. Russians and Belarusian students are equal to Ukrainian. It's not. That's not good idea for such situations that we have. Because I think that taking of responsibility by Russia as a state and by Russian as a people who elected this regime, it's a very important scene, and the whole world need to work to change this regime and to prevent next war. Because when we analyze history, we can conclude that if we don't stop Russia now, we need to wait for another war.
Thank you very much for being with us, Daryna. I think I have something to say about that, and maybe we all have something to say about that. But one of the challenges, I think, thinking about human rights is that human rights is not referring to collectivities, but to individuals. And that's, I think, one of the things we have to, if you say about 70% supports Putin, then, and then I immediately feel sympathy for what you're saying and not thinking about that. But I'm also thinking about the 30% who doesn't, so to say. And that's something to think about it, because one of the things is that the regime changed in Russia, I think, can only come from within and not from without. That's also something we learned about the last 30 years, I suppose. And so this is not an answer, but basically more the challenge we are facing, especially when it comes to human rights and so on. And I take your message to the University of Amsterdam.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good day, and we see each other again, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Good luck.
Good luck. So, well, this was meant to be an hour, so that's a bit like the idea. Again, I have to apologize for my technical breakdown. I'm only amateur in that, so that's basically what's happening with amateurs. But you recover. But I want to give Hans the last word for today, because I know he has. I don't know if you have already come up with the idea, but you had a beautiful idea, and I want to invite you to share that with us.
Yeah, when you was gone, we spoke about the idea of European capital of culture, and
Okay.
Daryna told me, well, this is also a national issue in the Ukraine, so you cannot do it only on the local level if you want to have a kind of support or yeah. Now, I think that the discussion that Sebastian started about how to deal with city to city, of course, we had all kind of examples in European cities that with this twin city, sister city dilemmas. We had it in Nicaragua, and then the first answer is, yeah, we go on with the twin city because we have a relation with the NGOs, with civic society, and not with the local government supported by Ortega. But in the end, it's a problematic situation, and we have the discussion, of course, in the international associations of municipalities, what to do with the membership of Russian cities or the co-presidencies, and how to evaluate and assess if a Russian city is not supporting a declaration against the war, but also not being against it. Is this a kind of sympathetic, the compromise that is still possible for a mayor in a Russian city, and should be read as a kind of statement against, but it's very difficult to find a way in this. And I think the European cities are mostly on the line for we're making a very point and breaking point. We say no to memberships of Russian cities, Russian persons, Russian organizations. But on the other hand, there is worldwide also that cities or organizations or universities are places to go on meeting each other and understanding, and also the refugees from Russia coming to Europe, they also are, well, we say in exile, but it's there's a kind of similar problematic. Yeah.
Is it possible to I always think about this in a threefold way. So you have the active support of President Putin, especially in his own, let's say, court, so to say, and then you have people who support him, but like on what has long been the Russian compromise, you take care of the state, and we take care of ourselves, and you don't interfere with our lives. And then we have, of course, the democratic opposition in Russia. Is it possible to think about city-to-city relationships along these lines, so to say? And which basically means that you support the democratic opposition or the democratic forces in a city, so to say.
Yeah, is they still there? But
I don't know.
This is, of course, in this moment very problematic. So there is something to say for the more official relations, what Daryna says, but the people arriving here, I would be also have some hesitation, as you do, for example, there are in Amsterdam arrived just the prima ballerina from the Moscow Ballet, and she say, well, I don't make this, I don't want to be part of this Russian establishment anymore. I go to the Netherlands and want to dance in the opera in Amsterdam. And to be that clear, so should we say, well, you're Russian? We, of course, we say you're welcome. And there's also a symbol of openness. And there is no good solution for this. It's terrible.
not perfect. Maybe good, but not perfect. So maybe someone wants the last word or to make the finishing point of this hour. And I would like to invite you, one of you want something to add to our discussion. And otherwise I will finish it up. Well, let's more.
Yes,
yeah, sorry. I just want to say I'm from Finland, and there are of course lots of discussions here now going on, because it is a lot also about whether we are next. And we have the history. I'm myself a second generation refugee. My mother was born in the part of Finland that now belongs to Russia. So we feel the Finns a lot for the Ukrainians, and that is shown in at every level. And we welcome the Russians that now come over border. We have a Russian minority already here. And I also, like what I wanted to say, that I think it is also important to continue to talk about human rights and use the rights speech, put human rights and humanitarian law violations should be spoken about. It is important to state that Putin is a war criminal. And it is like Hans said earlier, that here also and in the social media, that ordinary people, everybody use this human rights vocabulary now, and I think it is good and it is important. And thank you for the very interesting discussion.
Thank you too. Marta, you want the last word?
Oh, maybe. It's hard. It's hard, but I think we should be aware and sensitive about the trauma going on, and how traumatized the guests are, and how traumatized the hosting societies are, and what we are facing. And it's not business as usual. And
No.
and discussing all the abstract ideas and the twin cities, it seems so far away from today, and this discussion makes me really realize the extent of the depth of the horror situation, and this is not good timing at all. So I am kind of like so evenings should be for resting. Yes, and to try to keep, to be. I work in the migration field, exactly. So this is my job to manage the migration situation in the region, which is of course impossible to do. And what else? So yes, I think we should be very, very sensitive about what is going on, and when we also speak to Ukrainian colleagues, and yes, and ask how we can help to, and what should be done, and yes, so they don't feel all alone for that, because I think they feel very alone now, and yes, and that's it. So I need to go too. I don't want to go on with the meeting. So good night, everyone, and fingers crossed for Ukraine. Bye.
Good. Thank you very much. Good. And then I'll finish up. Thank you for everyone for participating here, and
Thank
for
you.
your voice and opinions. I appreciate it very much, and I'm sure everybody who will see this afterwards will appreciate it also. So I hope to see you again sometime, and so definitely we will. We have to stick together, and this is not about a happy ending or something like that, but to be continued, I would say. So thank you very much, and see you again.